So when we are first going to start by talking about muscular tissue. When we go ahead and we start talking about our muscular tissue, so muscular tissue, we have three types of muscles in our body. We have skeletal muscles, we have smooth muscles, and we have cardiac muscles, right? They're all different types of muscles that work in slightly different ways, and they all have slightly different structures and features compared to each other. Let's start by talking about skeletal muscles. Okay, the main tissue of the skeleton is bone, as you would know. Bone is strong and hard. It is made up of bone cells which are fixed firmly in a matrix of collagen and calcium salts. Bone is particularly strong. It can withstand compressive forces, and uh, it is strong. It is hard, but it also needs to be as light as possible so we can, move around easily. Now, inside a bone, we have two areas, okay, or two parts of the bone. The outermost part is known as the compact bone. The inner part is known as the spongy bone. So we have compact bone and we have spongy bone. The compact bone is generally dense and heavy, right? Spongy bone is like it's got these large spaces in between and it is generally filled up with your bone marrow. Then we have cartilage. Cartilage is hard, but it is flexible tissue. It is made up of cells that we call chondrocytes. So the name of the cells of the bone are osteocytes. The name of the cells of the cartilage are chondrocytes, right? So we have chondrocytes and they're going to be surrounded by a matrix which is going to consist of different amount of collagen fibrils. Cartilage is elastic. It basically can stretch and return to its original size, and it is able to withstand compressive forces. It is a good shock absorber, and you generally find it between the bones, right? Now, when we talk about cartilage, generally we have two types of cartilage. We have something known as hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is found at the ends of the bones, right? And in the nose and in your trachea and all of those ears, and also in your ear. Then we have white fibrous cartilage. White fibrous cartilage basically has bundles of densely packed collagen in the matrix. It has good tensile strength, but it is generally less flexible. It basically the white fibrous cartilage is found in the disc between your vertebrae. So between the vertebrae, between our spinal cord, we have these discs. So they are made by white fibrous cartilage, and it is also found between bones in the joints. Then we have something known as tendons. Tendons are made up of white fibrous tissue, not cartilage, white fibrous tissue. It consists of bundles of collagen fibers which form a strong but inelastic tissue. So it is ideal for joining muscle to bone. So tendons help join muscle to bone. Ligaments help attach bone to a bone, while tendons help attach a muscle to a bone. And one end of the tendon is attached to the muscle, and the other end is attached either to the bone or to the fibrous cover of the bone, right? This makes a secure attachment for muscle to bone and provides shock absorption if the joint is given a sudden stretch. Ligaments are the going to join two bones together and hold them in the correct alignment. They form a capsule around the joint and hold the bones together inside the joint itself. They're made of yellow elastic tissue, which gives an ideal combination of strength with elasticity. Some ligament capsules are very loose, so the joint can move quite freely. In other situations, the ligament is tighter, so there is less mobility. right? That is why in some areas you have more mobility and in some areas you have less mobility. Now, when we talk about our this entire concept of joint, right? So, as we talk about joints, we have got different types of joints all over in our body. So, for example, we have the ball and socket joint, right? That's the ball and socket joint. Examples of ball and socket joint are your hip joint and your shoulder joint. So, both your hip joint and your shoulder joint are like the ball and socket joint, right? So, it's literally like there's a ball and it's moving around in the socket. Then we can have hinge joint, right? Hinge joint, like the knee joint is a hinge joint. It opens up like the door hinge, right? Then we have an elbow joint. The elbow joint is a pivot joint. You can move your arm, rotate your arm backwards and forwards. Then we have the wrist joint, which is a saddle joint. Similarly, then we have our finger joint, and we have the joint between ankle bones. So we have different types of joints all over our body. And when we talk about it, the bones in a joint form two solid masses moving over each other, right? So two solid masses that are moving over each other. If the joint consisted simply of bone on bone, the ends would soon become thinner and weaker from rubbing together. So if there was no joint space, if there was no cartilage in the middle, if there was no synovial cavity, what would happen? That the bones would rub against each other and they would simply get worn off. To prevent this, the joint is lined with a replaceable layer of rubbery cartilage. This makes it possible for the joint to move smoothly. The most mobile joint also produce a liquid lubricant that is known as synovial fluid. It fills the joint cavity and makes sure that there is easy, friction free movement. So, look, you can see this is the joint cavity. In the joint cavity, the blue thing that you see, this blue thing is the cartilage, right? Then this is the layer of fat. This is again the blue thing is the layer of cartilage. And between the layers of cartilage, we have synovial fluid. And the entire joint cavity is lined by a membrane. That membrane is going to be known as synovial membrane. Now, the question comes, how do we move, right? Each of your skeletal muscle is attached by tendons to two different bones, extending across at least one joint. When muscles contract, they will pull on a bone, right? So it moves relative to another bone. So when you go ahead and talk about it, um, so when muscle is going to contract, they are going to pull on the bone. But when a muscle relaxes, it does not push in the opposite direction, right? For example, over here you can see that they've drawn the quadricep muscle. When the quadricep muscle is going to contract, it is going to put force on the bone. But when it will relax, it's not going to be putting any sort of force. It is simply going to stop contracting. So this is why the muscles of skeleton are found in pairs. So if I want to, for example, I want to flex my arm, I want to extend my arm. So to extend my arm, we have bicep muscle and we have tricep muscle, right? We have bicep muscle and we have tricep muscle. So what will happen that when the bicep muscle will contract, the tricep muscle will relax. And when the tricep muscle will relax, when the tricep muscle will contract, the bicep muscle will relax. So they have to work together in pairs, right? If I only had the bicep muscle, so when the bicep muscle would contract, my arm would move. But when it would relax, my arm would just stay the same because when the muscle relaxes, it just stops contracting. It doesn't put any other force. It doesn't push your arm back. So we need the tricep muscle. The tricep muscle has to contract when the bicep muscle is relaxing, so the arm can move, right? So these muscles that work in opposite direction to each other, we call them antagonistic muscle. And those muscles that extend a joint, we call them extensors. And those muscles that bend or flex a joint, we call them flexors. See, you can go ahead and see on this particular diagram, right? So see, they are working antagonistically. Extensor muscle contracts. When the extensor muscle is contracting, it is pulling the leg, the tibia, the fibula forward. The flexor muscle, on the other hand, is relaxed. Then it will become the opposite. The extensor muscle will become relaxed and the flexor muscle will contract, and the tibia or the fibula will be pulled in the other direction, right? So this is how muscles are actually going to be working. They're going to be working antagonistically. Now, when we went ahead or started off the topic, I told you that we are going to be dealing with three different types of muscles: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle, right? So, skeletal muscle is also known as striated muscle because it has got these sort of these, you can say, stripes. So, we say that it is striated muscle. It's got these stripes in it, and we also call it voluntary muscle, right? Because we can control our skeletal muscles, we can control our movements, right? So when you go ahead and talk about it, it is under the control of the voluntary nervous system. When you view it under the microscope, it appears like it has got these stripes on it, right? And it contracts rapidly, but it also fatigues and tires out quickly, right? You know that. That is basically what happens. On the cardiac muscle, for example, on the other hand, it doesn't tire out. Cardiac muscle, the heart keeps on beating, right? Smooth muscle is going to keep on contracting for long periods of time. So skeletal muscle is going to fatigue out really easily. So the structure is like this. The muscle fibers are made up of myofibrils lying parallel to each other. So we have our this myofibril. Okay, myofibril are all going to be, 1 second. So the muscle fibers are made up of myofibrils that are all lying parallel to each other. Each myofibril is made up of individual units, right? And the individual unit is known as a sarcomere. So this is going to be a sarcomere. So we have got multiple sarcomeres joined together to give you a myofibril. Now, sarcomere is made up of two proteins, actin and myosin. The cytoplasm of the microfibrils is known as sarcoplasm. It contains many mitochondria which supply the energy that the muscles need to contract. Okay. The network of membranes present in the whole system is known as the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And this sarcoplasmic reticulum actually releases your calcium ions. So we have muscle. Muscle is made up of many muscle fibers all lining on top of each other, all lying parallel to each other. Now, this one muscle fiber is going to be consisting of many muscle cells, and a single muscle cell is going to be consisting of many myofibrils all joining together. The plasma membrane of the myofibril is known as your sarcolemma. The cytoplasm of the myofibril is known as sarcoplasm. The myofibril is made up of sarcomeres, and sarcomeres consist of alpha filaments, myosin filaments, and actin filaments. And they have a network of tubes known as sarcoplasmic reticulum, which are responsible releasing um, for releasing your what do you call it, calcium ions, right? Now, this is basically what the situation actually looks like, right? So the way the entire process actually happens is that we have got a situation like this. So we have this sort of a band, right? We have this line. This line is known as the Z line. Okay, both the actin filaments are going to be attached to the Z line. Okay, then we have our a line in the middle, and the myosin fibers are all going to be attached to the line in the middle. Now, what happens that we have areas of overlap. So we have got areas that are basically different areas of overlapping, right? For example, that particular area where I only have the actin filaments, right? This area where I only have the actin filaments, my muscle is going to look lighter, right? Then I'm going to have an area where I will have both the actin as well as the myosin filament. That area is going to look darker. Then I will have the area where I will have only the myosin filament. That area will be in the middle. So because of the arrangements of the actin and myosin fibrils, it gives us basically a striated appearance. It looks like there are multiple stripes, like there is a dark stripe, then light stripe, then a medium stripe, like that. So that is why we say that they have a striated appearance. And the reason they have a striated appearance is because of the arrangement of the actin and myosin filaments. Now, since we are already talking about this process, so let's go ahead and talk about how the muscle is going to contract. This is showing you the relaxed state, and this is showing you the contracted state. Okay, and this is what the it looks like, right? So we've got light band, we've got dark band, and we've got a medium color band, right? So this the dark band, this entire region from one dark band to the other, we call it the A band. Then the we have the eighth zone, that's the medium color band, and then we have the I band, that is the light color band, right? So when we talk about it, the sarcomere actually consists of these two proteins, actin and myosin, which overlap to form characteristic stripes of the striated muscle, right? And observations of micrographs basically show that whether a muscle fiber is contracted or relaxed, the A band will remain the same length. Remember that. The A band is going to remain the same length. However, the light A band and the edge zone will become shorter when a muscle fiber is going to contract. So the edge zone, if you look over here, can you see this? So the I band and the edge zone have become shorter, but the A band remains the same whenever a muscle is basically going to be contracted. So this suggests that the two types of filaments slide over each other during contraction. And now the scientists have come up with the sliding filament theory that explains how the muscles are going to be contracting. Now, when we take a look at the structure of actin and myosin, this is basically what it's going to be looking like, right? A myosin molecule is made up of two long polypeptide chains twisted together. This is the myosin molecule, the pink one. So it consists of, if you look over here in detail, it consists of two long polypeptide chains that are twisted together. Each one ends in a large globular head which has ADP and inorganic phosphate molecules attached to it, right? So it's basically got what? It's got this myosin head. We call it myosin head, and it's got ADP and inorganic phosphate attached to it. A myosin filament is made up of a lot of these molecules. This is a single molecule, myosin molecule, and a myosin filament is made up of a lot of these myosin molecules with their heads sticking out from the filament like this. So multiple heads are sticking out from the myosin filament. An actin filament, on the other hand, the actin one is in blue, is made up of two chains of actin monomers. So the two chains of actin monomers join together like beads on a necklace. The shape of the actin molecule produces binding sites for myosin at regular intervals. So, at regular intervals, there's going to be a binding site for this myosin head to attach to the actin filament, right? The shape of the actin molecule produces binding sites for myosin at regular intervals, at which the globular heads of the myosin molecules can fit. There is another long chain of protein molecules that we call tropomyosin. Tropomyosin is going to wrap around the actin filament. The actin chain, it's going to wrap around it, right? In relaxed state, when the muscle is relaxed, this tropomyosin will cover the binding sites on the actin filament, right? And when you go ahead and when you're going to go ahead and talk about it, the tropomyosin also has molecules of another protein, troponin, and these are also attached at regular intervals along the chain. So how does the process actually happen? How does the muscle contraction take place? So the muscle contraction takes place like this. Calcium ions are released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay. So if you remember, sarcoplasmic reticulum was the network that was present in our myofibrils, right? So it releases calcium ions. Those calcium ions will attach to the binding sites on the troponin molecule. So if you remember, we have studied about the troponin molecule. So they will bind to the active sites on the troponin molecule, right? As a result, the troponin molecule will pull on the tropomyosin molecules. Remember, we had tropomyosin and top of it we had troponin. So it will bind to the tropomyosin and it is basically going to expose the binding site. So now the binding site on the actin filament is going to be exposed, right? And what's going to happen that the shape of the myosin will then allow the shape of the myosin head will allow it to attach to the actin filament, and a cross bridge is going to form. This cross bridge is known as ectomyosin bridge, right? This changes the molecular shape and pulls the actin filament across the myosin like this. The actin filament is pulled across the myosin, and this increases the interlocking region and it also shortens the sarcomere. The bridge will then break like this. The bridge is then going to break, and then what is going to happen again? Next, in the next binding site, again the troponin will bind to the tropomyosin. The binding site will be exposed. The head will attach to the next binding site. It will again pull on the actin filament. So again the actin filament will move to the side, and then again the bridge will break, and then again the bridge will form with the next binding site, and then again the actin molecule will be pulled, and in this way the actin molecule will be pulled from one side to the other. So this is how the sliding filament theory actually works, right? So what's going to happen that first the calcium ions will bind to the troponin molecules, So that will change the shape of the troponin molecules and they will pull the tropomyosin molecules out of the way. So now what's going to happen? The binding sites are now ready and exposed. The myosin head will bind to the actin and it will form an actin myosin bridge. ADP and phosphate. Remember, I told you that this muscle, the phosphate head, sorry, I said phosphate head, myosin head has ADP and phosphate attached to it, right? So ADP and phosphate are released from the myosin head. The myosin changes shape. The head bends forward, moving the actin filament towards the side. So this head is going to bend, and as it is going to bend, it's going to move the actin filament towards the side. Then free ATP, another molecule of ATP will bind to the head, causing another change shape of the myosin. So the head so the binding of the head to the actin strand is broken, right? Then the bridge is going to be broken. After the bridge is broken, now the ATPase, which is the enzyme that breaks down ATP, is going to start working with the help of calcium ions. It's going to break down ATP to give you ADP and phosphate, right? So what's going to happen? The phosphate head will return to its original position and it's going to be ready for the next cycle, for the next contraction, right? So this is actually how the muscle contractions take place. Any confusion so far? Anything you want to ask regarding to the topic?
No, miss. I
Okay.
understood.
Now, we had to talk about our okay. So this is related to smooth muscle. Sorry, skeletal muscle. Then we also have smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. Smooth muscle is not striped, it is not striated, and it is generally under the control of involuntary nervous system. So we can't really control our smooth muscles. Smooth muscles are present, for example, in the walls of your arteries, in your sphincters, in the esophageal sphincter, in your stomach pyloric sphincter, it your urinary bladder sphincter. All of these are going to be made up of smooth muscle, right? It contracts and it fatigues out slowly. Then we also have cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart, right? It is striated and the fibers are joined by special cross connections. Cardiac muscle have the ability to contract spontaneously, which means that it does not need to be stimulated by either nerves or hormones and it does not tire out. Now, when we go ahead and we talk about the process, so the cells of the skeletal muscle have certain features in common. They usually contain many ATP, right? Another thing is that the muscle cells also contain myoglobin. This is a protein that is similar to hemoglobin, but it has one protein chain instead of four. If you remember, hemoglobin had two alpha chains and two beta chains. Myoglobin only has one chain. Okay. Myoglobin has much higher affinity for oxygen than hemoglobin, meaning that it binds to oxygen much slowly. And you can see that at partial pressure of 50, right? At partial pressure of uh, look, for hemoglobin to be fully saturated, right? For hemoglobin to be close to fully saturated, it needs to have what? It needs to have the partial pressure of around 90-100%. So when the partial pressure of oxygen is around 90-100%, that is when hemoglobin is going to be saturated to its maximum value, right? For hemoglobin, just 40% is enough. Even if there's 40% oxygen there, it's going to instantly bind to it and it's going to become 100% saturated. If you take a look at 50% saturation, so hemoglobin needs around 25% partial pressure, 25% partial pressure to get even half saturated. On the other hand, this is going to need only around 2. Even if the partial pressure for oxygen is 2, myoglobin is going to be 50% saturated. So its binding ability, its binding capability, its affinity for oxygen is going to be much, much greater, right? Myoglobin basically acts as an oxygen store in muscles. Most muscles have a rich blood supply that can bring oxygen to the tissue, which is the respiring tissue, right? When we go ahead and talk about it, whenever oxygen levels are going to fall, hemoglobin is going to easily give up the oxygen, and then the myoglobin can continue to supply oxygen to the muscle. So it acts as an oxygen store. Now, when we talk about types of skeletal muscle fiber, so remember I told you about muscle fiber, I told you they're made up of myofibrils. So, muscle fiber is made up of myofibrils, but there are also different types of the muscle fiber. We have slow twitch muscle fiber and we have fast twitch muscle fiber. Slow twitch muscle fiber are adapted to a steady action over a period of time. They contract relatively slowly and they can stay contracted for a long time. They're used by the body to maintain posture. For example, when you're sitting upright, so it's the slow twitch muscles that are actually activated and during long periods of activity. These slow twitch fibers have a rich blood supply, lots of mitochondria, and lots of myoglobin. These adaptations mean that they can maintain their activity without needing to respire anaerobically because they've got so much mitochondria, so much blood supply, so much myoglobin, so they have that rich supply of oxygen, so they can continue to respire aerobically. They don't need to respire anaerobically anytime soon. So because of that, they're able to stay contracted for such a long period of time, right? The rich blood supply and high levels of myoglobin mean that they're deep red in color. Slow twitch muscles need glucose as a fuel. This is supplied by the network of blood vessels that can produce ATP as long as oxygen is available. Then we have fast twitch muscles. Fast twitch muscles are contract very rapidly, making them well suited for sudden, brief activity. They can function anaerobically, like they can function without oxygen by using glycolysis. That is why they also tire out faster. They have got less blood vessels compared to the slow twitch fibers. They have low levels of myoglobin for storing oxygen, and they also have less number of mitochondria. As a result, fast twitch fibers are paler in color, but they do have rich glycogen stores. Those glycogen stores can easily be broken down to give you glucose for both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. They also contain high levels of creatinine phosphate, right? Which can be used to form ATP from ADP. So they also have creatinine phosphate. So you can use it to make ATP from ADP. These adaptations mean that more myofibrils are packed into the fast twitch fibers and uh, 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 um, so they're more myosin fibers, right? So they're able to contract faster. They're able to respond much faster than the slow twitch fibers. And they cannot produce high levels of ATP over a long period of time, but they can give you very fast, powerful contractions for a small period of time, right? Most people have roughly equal amounts of slow twitch muscle fibers and fast twitch fibers in their muscles, right? But the combination can be different, right? For example, in cyclists, in swimmers, in those kind of people, they have a lot of slow twitch fibers. But in other people like weightlifters, for example, they have more fast twitch fibers because they need, to be able to act rapidly. So these are the two different types of fibers that you're going to basically be dealing with. So we have got fast twitch fibers and we've got slow twitch fibers. So generally our body is made up of a combination of both of them, but the combination can be different. So those, for example, people, if you look at the graph, runners, for example, or swimmers, because they need to be able to do the movement for a long period of time, they have more slow twitch fibers, right? When you've got people, for example, like sprinters, right, or people like weightlifters who need that sudden energy, who need that sudden movement, they have less slow twitch fibers and they have more fast twitch fibers. So the fast twitch fibers are able to give you that strong, powerful, rapid movement because they do not have that many mitochondria, because they do not have that much myoglobin. So they have space available for more myosin fibers to be packed inside of it. And as a result, what's going to happen? That they are going to be able to contract. They're going to be able to contract much quicker. They're going to be able to give you more rapid response. So that is what we had to do related to skeletal muscles. Anything you want to ask so far related to the topic? Is there any confusion?
No, miss. Miss, I was asking about the topics. The topics are not uploaded to the
Manur,
website.
I'll take a look. I've given the recordings to them. They were supposed to upload it. I will take a look. I will talk to them. If they're not uploaded, I will then do it myself.
Okay, thank you.
I'll do it over the weekend. I'll do it. Okay. Manur, we'll go ahead and we will stop it over here for today. So we have done the skeletal muscle portion of the topic. Okay. Now we need to just go over the topic of our cardiac muscle, right? So we're going to go over the cardiac muscle, how it is going to work. We're going to talk about how the heartbeat is controlled and how the breathing rate is actually going to be controlled. So those are the topics that we have to go ahead and just finish off. So inshallah, in the next class, we'll just finish off with this topic and then we can move on to the next one. That is the control of internal environment. Okay.
Okay, miss.
Okay. Thank you so much, Manur. I'll see you in the next class. Have a good day.